Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Welcome to session 101, Anti-Racist Supervision in Student Affairs. I don't know what this red squiggle over my slide is about, so I apologize for that. My name is Claire Beaudro. I work at Kennesaw State University in Career Planning and Development as a career and internship advisor, and I am joined by...
Hey, I'm Maya Richardson-Echols, and I work as the Interim Director of University Housing and Residence Life at Clayton State University. So Claire and I came up with this presentation as a research project. We are both in the University of Georgia Student Affairs Leadership Program.
Yep, so we're doc buddies. So we are really excited to have y'all with us today. It's obviously a really light and sunny topic. I say that joking, but I am really excited about this content and really happy to see so many of y'all here with us. So let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, this red squiggle is going to drive me bonkers. I really don't know what that's about. Today we are going to talk a little bit about our goals and outcomes for today are talking about allyship and really understanding what allyship is as articulated by Brown and Ostrov, and then also identifying anti-racist actions that you can take in your institution right now. So as we look through the cycle of supervision, how can we incorporate those anti-racist practices into all stages of the cycle: hiring, onboarding, supervising, and developing your staff members? So we're hoping you're going to walk away with some tangible action items today. So please feel free to ask questions along the way. We'll also have a Q&A at the end. You can clear the annotation and it will remove the squiggle. Okay, you are my friend. Thank you. I don't know how to do that. Maybe that's it. Clear my drawings. Okay, I just did that, but that didn't do it. So thank you, Jalen, for your idea. I don't know how to take care of that. I wonder if I stop share and reshare, if it'll fix it. I'm just going to stop that really quick so that I can try to get rid of it, because it's just going to drive me crazy. Okay, I see no squiggle. Yes. Okay. Sorry and thank you, Jalen. You're my hero. You get 10,000 points. I don't know what those points are toward, but you get them. So, okay, so we've talked about goals. We've talked about learning outcomes. So let's go ahead, and it's important for us as we lay the foundation for this presentation to acknowledge the indigenous lands that we're on here in Georgia. These are the people of Georgia whose lands we all sit on. I know that some of you are coming from Florida, North Carolina, other parts in the Southeast. So I just encourage you to continue to acknowledge the folks whose lands you all are on. Similarly, it's important that we think about the history of slavery, oppression, and violence endured by Black people and people of color in this country. So as we think about the work that we're discussing today, white supremacy is at the heart of that suffering and that violence. And I just think it's really important for us to all be on the same page as we move forward. So that is part and parcel of what we are talking about today. So to that end, we here in higher education are continuing to be in the structure of white supremacy. Higher education is based on bureaucratic models that are rooted in social domination. And at the same time, we as student affairs professionals, as housing professionals, have social justice as the heart of our work, and white supremacy is the antithesis of that. In 2015, ACPA and NASPA revised their core competencies. There had been a core competency around equity, diversity, and inclusion. They revised that to be social justice inclusion, with the idea that we're moving from a more passive sort of let's think about diversity to a more active anti-racist, social justice, attitude, orientation, proactive approach. So our goal really is to translate that social justice and inclusion competency into actionable anti-racism. So that is what we're talking about today. So I think it's important for us to start on the same definitions. So anti-racism involves taking stock of and eradicating policies that are racist and have racist outcomes, making sure that ultimately we're working toward a much more egalitarian, emancipatory society. So that is really what we are about today. Allyship, and this definition is from Brown and Ostrov. It's defined by people of color, not by dominant identity holders. And I think that that's really important. So there are two prongs of this allyship definition. One is informed action and the promotion of social justice. And the other is affirmation and offering of support. So having meaningful relationships and accountability between white folks or allies and people of color. So perhaps in other literature that you have encountered, you have heard accomplice or you have heard co-conspirator. These are words that are used to address a perceived passivity in the word allyship, but you can see from the definition we're presenting that action is really embedded into both of these prongs. And so for that reason, I really like it. I really like this definition of allyship, particularly because it was created by people of color. And I think that it's really important that we as white folks are listening to people of color when it comes to anti-racist action, when it comes to how we can show up in allyship, support, and anti-racism. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maya.
Thanks, Claire. So to begin this conversation, we're going to be giving you all tips on anti-racist practices through all the different steps of the hiring process, employment cycle. And so that begins with recruitment and selection. So what Claire is showing now is the integrated model of staffing, which was created in 2008 by Roger Winston and Don Creamer. So this model illustrates the process beginning with recruitment and following through orientation, our work with supervision, our work with staff development, the performance appraisal and separation process as well. And so what you'll notice on the model is that there's some overlap in all of that. Not all of these things exist at once, especially over when you see supervision to performance appraisal and staff development. Those are all on top of each other as they continue to happen at the same time. So without knowing all of you hiring managers personally, I know that your presence at SEAHO at least lets me know that we have a shared goal of inclusive hiring practices at minimum, right? But it's our hope to continue to address racism in those spaces. And so unless the racism is addressed and eradicated in the places that we're looking to make diverse, we're simply bringing people of color into violent and unsafe spaces. I can attest to that. So it's our hope that the tips we're providing from our research can at least assist you through the employment process. And so we've listed out some tips that we have found. So if you're able, we know that everybody's not able to do this. So if you're able, posting to diversity specific job boards or using the blind hiring program to find candidates, making sure that we're being consistent and fair to all of our candidates by utilizing structured interviews. If we can, interviewing our female and minority applicants before our male applicants, and then eliminating the use of social media as a candidate vetting tool. So I know that LinkedIn is something that we go to, and I think that that's fine, but making sure that we understand that social media is also used as a space for expression, and that does not have anything to do with skill and ability. So we talk about fit a lot. So remembering that the reliance on fit sometimes stifles diversity. I think I've heard fit over my years at different institutions and in recruitment processes. And so knowing that I think that there's something to the merit of fit, but remembering to be able to spell out what that actually is. So does this person not fit, meaning that the skills and abilities that they have don't match with the actual responsibilities of the position? Or if there's a environment that you're putting this person in that you don't feel is helpful for that person or for the environment. So making sure that we're able to actually spell out the words of what fit means, and training all of your recruitment groups on doing that as well. If you can, again, recruiting candidates from HBCUs and MSIs. And if you're recruiting out of PWI, trying to seek out organizations that represent Black students and students of color. So I know that one thing that I do during the CUHOI intern process, I do go into the candidate pool and I try to look for students that are currently serving at MSIs and serving at HBCUs. I work at a predominantly Black institution, and I want to see if what experiences that they have match with some of the needs of my students that are staying on in the summer. So we did also list a couple of housing staff considerations. So when we first started this research project, of course, we weren't thinking housing specifically, but we tried to brainstorm and think of what some of those are, and we would love to hear your thoughts and experiences as well. But some of the ones that we listed were during the student staff leadership group process, trying to eradicate the instances of appearance-based assessments. So for our hiring managers, knowing that you're sending out recruitment teams, whether they're student staff recruitment teams or paraprofessionals, giving them actual structure to the assessment that they go into the group process with, if that is something that we're still doing. I know that coronavirus kind of upheaved what we all plan to do or what we usually do, but making sure that there's actual structure in the assessment that they go into the group process with. And then at some of our large corral recruitment spaces like Oshkosh Placement Exchange or the Placement Exchange, trying to establish recruitment staff team expectations when they're going in. If we can, design questions and processes that consider our most marginalized so as to automatically include all other people. So remembering that there's people, let's say like me, who are coming into a space that already have these notions of, I don't belong here. Because at the beginning, we already started talking about how this is a white supremacist space. So what can I do to think of the most marginalized individual who's looking at my post that I'm putting on higher ed jobs, who's responding to my emails that I'm going back and forth and getting them hired on, and then is coming to meet me and my team? How can I make sure that I am being inclusive to all of those people? So are there any other thoughts or experiences that anybody else has had to create an anti-racist recruitment process, or if there's something that you've seen at another institution that has been admirable to you? The chat is open and we'll be monitoring that. But of course, please feel free to raise your hand so that you can speak up as well.
Maya, we did get a contribution in the chat of something from NYU. Thank you for that resource, Brooke. Ricardo just added into the chat, providing the questions beforehand to allow candidates equal time to prepare. That's a great suggestion. Just as a note, sort of jumping off of Brooke's providing of a resource, we also have some resources we're going to be providing y'all at the end of today as well. But please, if anyone has anything else they'd like to share, we would love to hear your voice or hear your thoughts in the chat.
So Jack Lastinger raised their hand.
Hey, sorry if I missed my chance. My name is Jax. Okay, cool. My name is Jax. I use they, them pronouns. Yeah, one thing that I've seen as well is like this idea that like, oh, like because we live in the South or because we live in like a more rural community or whatever the reason might be, that like diverse candidates don't want to work here. And in that way, we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot before we've even started.
That is interesting. I see also staff training on hiring bias specifically in regards to appearance. staff training on hiring bias. Matthew, can you explain that a little bit more? And Jax, thank you for that opinion. I would also say not guessing what minority applicants are trying to do, not guessing what some of their intentions are would be helpful. So trying to take all candidates that are applying to your position, being as equitable as possible through your process.
One thing we tried to do this year at UM specifically, and admittedly we have a long way to go, but we've started having this conversation on like equitable hiring practices. So during one of our in-services, we have a training on hiring bias, and it could be so much better, but I'm really proud that we've started doing it. And one of the things we on purpose did this year in our remote setting is, hopefully creating more accessibility in our application process in that, but also tried to eliminate other roadblocks. So for example, this year we told people, come as you may, feel free to dress casually. And I remember, for example, a lot of students saying, well, what if they look like they just rolled out of bed? It's like, well, that's actually not what we're here to discuss. We're here to see how they're performing in our process that we designed to identify skills that will lead them towards being a strong RA or CA. So we started having those discussions. I think, interestingly, we just did some of our hiring yesterday, and we started to identify areas where some of that feedback was still given. So we have good feedback on how our training can advance or be better in the future now too. So I think it's ever evolving, but we've taken the first baby step.
That's awesome, Matthew. Yeah, I'm gonna say right now, and I think this is true throughout the rest of this presentation, our goal here isn't perfection. And I think that for a lot of our white colleagues especially, we can get bogged down in feeling like I need to be perfect. The goal isn't being perfect. The goal is to keep trying to improve, to keep doing better, to keep moving toward more inclusive and more anti-racist practices. So let's not let perfection stand in the way of moving toward progress.
Mm-hmm. Very true. We have a couple of folks coming up in the chat. Let's not base someone's ability off of their received degree. Yeah, so remembering that spaces have been gatekept for a while, and that matters for the applicants that you have applying to your positions. Michael says, most recently for all graduate assistant recruitment at Clemson, housing took the time to compile information in one place for candidates, including the position descriptions, interview questions, departmental information we knew candidates would scrub the university website to learn about. That's good. Jalen, I love this one. So one thing that they do at UNF is give candidates the opportunity to share their pronouns and phonetic pronunciation of their names. I swear, if I hear another story about a Ladasha, and that was a lot of times that I hear that, it makes me feel that our space does have work to do, and of course we do. But asking for their phonetic pronunciation definitely matters and matters to candidates. I'm losing my cursor. I can't scroll down. Can you see the other ones, Claire?
Yeah, we're talking about staff needing to be trained before going into interviews, how to recognize their own bias. That's from Madeline. So yeah, training in anticipation of a search process and or coming to consensus on a rubric for evaluation of candidates. All of those kinds of things are good practice and help reduce fit and reliance on some of those squishier practices that are subject to bias and prejudice. For professional staff recruitment, having the search chair and or committee meet with equity and diversity to go over what's legal, illegal in interviewing. Yeah, so the need for training of search committees basically is coming up. And then Brooke is sharing some more research, some more resources. So yeah, there are a lot of good ideas here in the chat. Maya, do you want to move forward into orientation?
Yeah, we can go into orientation, and of course, feel free to continue. We'll continue monitoring, and if we have time at the end, or if we have a little bit of time as we go through, we'll pick up what's going on over there. So the next step in the staffing process is onboarding. So you've done the thing, you've done all of your interviews, your recruitment staff did a great job in getting a great candidate. So what can you do when it comes to onboarding? So I know that a lot of us, our institutions, human resources teams kind of make what onboarding looks like for the institution, which is fine. And if you do have the ability or the privilege to be able to speak towards what that looks like, you know, kudos to any mid-level or higher level managers that have the ability to do that. But for your departments, you definitely have a lot of say-so if you are in those management positions. So are you able to incorporate diversity and inclusion workshops into the orientation process for everyone that you're bringing in to your space? Can you require your staff to participate in bias incident training every so odd months or so odd years? Examining your policy at your institution related to dress code, including hairstyles and things like that. So I know that a lot of us who are sitting in this space, just by seeing some familiar names come through, these are the things that the most marginalized individuals are coming into the space thinking that you may quote unquote care about. So how can we go ahead and eradicate that from being a part of the process? And then perceptions about what is deemed appropriate or professional, remembering that those are rooted in white supremacist thoughts. So if you're mentioning professionalism, can you spell out in expectations to your staff members what professionalism means in the different variety of roles and responsibilities that they have, rather than slapping the word of professional onto your expectations? So we know that there was a lot that happened last year, specifically around this time. Yesterday, we all acknowledged the year anniversary of the tracking, hunting down, and murder of Ahmaud Arbery. And with that, we also had the murder of George Floyd at the hands of police, and Breonna Taylor at the hands of police as well. And so there was a lot of conversations on our campuses about what can we do, right? I know that there were large, what can we do? There were statements coming from presidents left and right, and maybe you've even made some statements for yourself. But what we wanted to hear are just if there's been anything implemented since calls of racial justice. Some of you have mentioned them already in our previous conversation about recruitment, but what have you done or what have you seen on your campuses that has taken a step towards anti-racist behavior or practices since the spring of 2020?
And if possible, like specific to onboarding.
Sure. One thing that I wanted to, give me a second. So this is an interesting concept too, if people are typing or thinking about raising their hands. Someone messaged me about using social media to try to identify candidates that may be involved in insurrectionist behavior. So I would love to hear commentary from anyone on thoughts of that. So the question that we're asking towards the slide is if there's anything that your institutions have done since calls of racial justice in 2020 regarding their processes, how to make their processes a little anti-racist, or how to make their processes anti-racist. And then from the direct message that I received, I just wanted to hear opinions or thoughts about using the social medias of different candidates for identification of insurrectionist behavior, or let me read that, insurrectionist behavior or conspiracy theory behavior. So that is interesting. You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Alyssa Jo Johnson. I work at Florida Gulf Coast University. Just thinking about when we use the term insurrectionist, like we are thinking currently what happened in the Capitol, like that's what we're considering insurrectionist behavior. However, 20 years ago, insurrectionist behavior looked like working to get rights for people that needed them. So like, if we are looking for those things, does that actually create more barriers than we're trying to create? Because when I'm thinking about it, like insurrectionists at this point, yes, this is really negative, but at the same time, like, does that flip and actually create barriers that we don't want to create for others that are merely working to get the same rights as everybody else?
Thank you. That's a good point. Yasas?
Yes, I actually, Alyssa, I had a similar point. We were actually thinking about it. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm in a coffee shop right now.
We can.
It's the fact that in trying to single out through social media, are we not promoting biased behavior? And then so the equity of, you know, if we want everyone to be equitable, we should treat everyone equitable. So when does that line stop? And at the same time, we want to encourage, you know, we want to encourage diverse thoughts and behavior, which is, you know, conservative and liberal. We don't want fake news and all on the fringe. We don't want that. But how do we educate and bring diverse thoughts instead of separating? It's something we did think about that a lot, especially because our institution is in a more, I would say, conservative, fringe-heavy side of the state, and we were always worried about how that would affect our campus. And so that was one of the conversations. How do we single out? And then part of it was, if we are single out, that's like a precedent for other bias type behavior. So we're going in circles, trying to help and not help at the same time. And the other thing I was going to say with onboarding processes as well is that we did a big review of our policies and procedures, and we've been working on it progressively throughout the year. And one of the onboarding things that we talked about is skills-based, adding skills to students from diverse backgrounds, especially if if you think about people of color traditionally, not traditionally, but overall trend is that since we don't have access to as many resources through power and oppression, those skills might not necessarily be translated in an interview and maybe in the job. So how do we bridge that gap, help them gain a skill that maybe a student who has all the power in the system might already have? And it might be for different places for different other people, but just skills based so that we can get them to the same place.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, go ahead, Maya.
Oh, God. I was actually just going to comment on the social media part first. I was looking for everyone's commentary on it. For me, I'm big on it's LinkedIn or bust. And that's just for consistency purposes. And then also in my thoughts, if you're training your recruitment staff or your recruitment team on the what to look for when it comes to the resume or in the questions process, you're probably going to be able to learn some thoughts of an individual aside from using their social media platforms to do so.
I'm thinking in the interest of time that I want to keep us moving forward,
Yes.
But I'm loving the conversation. So keep throwing ideas into the chat, y'all. Really appreciate your active engagement. So now we're going to talk a little bit about supervision. So by far and away, I think the most important thing we can do as supervisors in terms of taking anti-racist action is leading by example. So educate yourself, make sure that you're looking at current events, understanding racial violence that's going on around you and in this country and in the world, systemic racism and white supremacy. There are so many resources out there, and especially in light of everything that happened in 2020, I think so many of those resources have come to the foreground and are a lot easier to find, easier to access. So there's really no excuse to not be educated is what I'm going to say. And to folks who are just beginning their anti-racist action journey and don't know where to start, We're going to provide you some resources of some great places to look. I would also suggest following anti-racist activists on social media. It's a great way to get a little daily dose of what they're thinking, what they're responding to into your feed, and have it become more top of mind. I love following Ijeoma Oluo and Austin Channing Brown, a lot of other, I tend to follow a lot of Black female activists, but you can follow a diversity of folks, but a lot of these folks are going to just give you a lot of really good thoughts about what is very of this moment, like happening today, happening in these last couple days, whatever that might be. So that's a great way to incorporate education into your daily practice. You're already scrolling through Instagram, might as well get a dose of anti-racism in there as well. Adopting policies that promote equity. So putting in a zero tolerance policy for racist work practices among your staff. That feels like a given, but is it there? If not, let's incorporate it. Is there a whistleblower policy to promote a culture of transparency and accountability in your workplace? If that's not there, let's try and put that in there, or let's try and model it. Even if it doesn't have to be a written down policy, can I model promoting that culture of transparency and holding people accountable? Maya talked about this a little bit in a previous slide, but reviewing policies, practices, and communications. How do they land on folks with different identities? Are there words like professionalism that are coded in Eurocentric and white supremacist norms that we can eradicate from our language and from how we do our work? As an example, as I mentioned, I work in a career services office. I led a team in my office to examine our internal and external policies documents to make sure that in our descriptions about on-campus recruiting and our expectations for students and for employers and all of those kinds of things, are there pieces of language in there that are going to land differently on different folks? Are we talking about dress standards for men and for women, but we're not being as inclusive as we could be from a gender expression or gender identity perspective? I know I'm sort of going a little bit to the left here off of anti-racism, but when we're examining these practices in terms of anti-racism, how can we examine them for all isms and all marginalizations and make them as inclusive as they possibly can be? And then challenging racist and biased behavior in the moment and often. I think that this is just so important. How can I build an anti-racist culture when I'm showing up in public and in private the same way? So I think I am known in my office as that white girl who talks about anti-racism and racism. I'm happy to be that person because I think it's important that I bring awareness to this, that I get the ear of other white folks because they are more, the research really indicates that they're more likely to listen to me than to folks of color. And so how can I use that power and that privilege to empower others and to create space for others? So these are some of the things that I think you can do as a supervisor. Another set of things you can do is invest in your supervisees. Every time Maya and I hit this slide, this top bullet just jumps off the screen to us. Apply the same commitment to inclusion that you have for your students to your staff. It's so important, friends. Your supervisees are just as deserving of the care, cognizance, and intentionality that you extend to students. So give that to your people. They need it and they deserve it. Acknowledge your own areas for growth and do your own work. So don't put folks of color or Black folks into the position of having to educate you. Do the work yourself. Admit when you need to be better, need to build knowledge, and then follow through on it. And then suggesting some tangible things you can offer your employees. Hi, Nicole, I just saw your note in the chat. That's great. I'm glad you're clapping. This is, I think, we can look toward last year, but I think it's definitely true in less extreme moments also. In times of heightened stress, how can you lighten the burden for your employees of color? Can you offer them time off? Can you offer them a safe space to not be okay? Can you proactively extend a deadline on a project? So, you know, think back to last year. It's the end of May and George Floyd has just been killed. Could you have taken an action with your staff of color to proactively show them your investment in them? Could you have offered them a day off or offered them a space for they and other staff of color to get together and have a safe space to talk or debrief? So all of this stuff is really important. And yes, I totally agree with the folks that are saying in the chat that it's hard getting supervisors to do this. Absolutely. I'm hoping that everyone in this room as a supervisor is seeing this and taking notes and deciding that they're going to do it. So hopefully we can sort of build a little chain of people trying to be proactive and making positive change for their employees. Okay, so I got a question about, can I talk about the fine line between offering opportunity without coming off as racially insensitive? So I think that's a great question. I'm going to speak for myself because that's the only person I can really speak for. But what I would do in a situation like this is to go to my staff and ask them what they need, and perhaps have thought about a few suggestions of ways I think that I could show up for them in allyship and show up for them in support so that they don't have to generate all of those solutions themselves, but really being open to solutions that they have also generated. So to me, it's really about partnership and support and seeing their whole person and their humanity. Maya, do you have any thoughts that you want to sort of chime in on with that?
I thought that was good.
Okay, great. There's another direct message here. Tips on how to navigate the review of policy when pressured by state policy and anti-people of color, Black institutional history. Ooh, yeah, that's real. So I think a lot of that really has to do with who is reviewing this policy, who sees the policy. So as an example, when I was talking about the policies that I kind of led a team in reviewing this year, those were departmental policies, both internal and external. So the highest it sort of went was the executive director of my department, and she's very supportive of anti-racist work. So I kind of knew I was going to get buy-in. But I think if you have a CDO, a chief diversity officer, if you have some institutional supports like that, I think this is a great time to try to loop them in. But yeah, this is difficult. This is difficult work. This is difficult work in the structures of white supremacy that is higher education and in the South with our history. So it's complicated. I'm not saying that it's easy, but I'm saying I think that we can continue to move the ball forward and continue to make progress. So I'm going to go back to our goal here isn't perfection. It's to keep moving toward anti-racism and active inclusion. Okay, I'm looking at time. I'm wanting us to move along. So please, oh, hi there. Great, terrific. If you can go to this website and respond to the prompt, that would be fabulous. So the prompt is going to be, I wish my white colleagues would. And so for my white folks in the room, I would encourage you to use this as an opportunity to listen. Join me in listening to what our colleagues of color are going to tell us that they wish we would do. So please feel free to go to that Poll Everywhere link. I think Maya put it in the chat. Hopefully that works for folks.
I'm putting it in.
You can also just go to pollev.com/ClaireBDR298. Yep.
So Claire and I actually, over the months, have had many conversations about BIPOC, and I know that there might be ideas in this space about it. But for me, I usually try to target out Black and then person of color. And that might be just a personal preference. I know that my Black experience and the Black experience is completely different. This country and what has happened to Black people versus others. So I do use Black and people of color.
Absolutely. And if I've been only saying people of color, or I have been going back and forth in presenting today, it's mostly because I'm getting a little tongue-tied. But I usually like to say Black and people of color. So that is my intention. So I'm trying to hold myself accountable to that. I'm loving what's coming up in here. Yeah, acknowledging that history impacts the present. Absolutely. Listen, I've heard listen come up a bunch on here. And this prompt is actually from a dissertation that we read while we were doing the research for this presentation. A scholar interviewed Black employees and asked them this specific thing. And over and over and over again, the response was listen. So white folks, white colleagues who are here with me, take note. Let's do that. And let's not use our other experiences as a proxy for racial marginalization, because they're not the same. So yeah, let's keep having a couple more of these responses come in. I'm loving this.
Speaking up for coworkers is definitely helpful. Recognizing that my experience as a Black woman is not the same experience. So remember, that one's a double-edged sword. You're fighting racism as well as fighting the patriarchy at the same time, in a space where your voice is not always heard, but your labor is definitely expected. So I appreciate that one.
I'm looking at time, Maya. I think we want to keep going.
Yes,
I love all of these responses, y'all. I am not trying to silence anyone's voice. I just am also mindful of time and want to get us to staff development.
That's
so take
true.
it away, Maya.
I will. So I'm going to go through this a little bit more quickly. So in case there is Q&A, we can get to it. But for development of staff, remembering that that's the next cog in the integrative staffing model wheel. Creating an inclusive work environment requires deliberate, sustained efforts in data and numbers, culture, and day-to-day people management. So this is work that's going to continue to happen between yourself and your staff. And some tips that we provided on this is continuing to assess yourself in your organization. If you're in a space of privilege, trying to use your voice in different roundtables or in different one-on-one situations to where you can advocate for a less violent space for others. Asking your employees for their feedback. We have this tool that's going to be provided in the resources that we give in the chat at the end of this, the concentric circles impacting privilege and power assessment for you all. So this is just a way to continue to audit what you have and how it can be a little more anti-racist. Encouraging in-person and virtual safe spaces for Black and person of color employees, and remembering that that safe space is for them, not you. That's not a space for you to gatekeep. I'm just going to keep that there. Opening up conversations, bringing your staff together with expert or trained facilitators, and sharing what they're thinking and feeling, and then learning about how to talk about racism. And we definitely want to make sure that we're acknowledging that this is not easy for everyone. For Claire and I, it's something that we researched. For me specifically, if you know me, I'm okay with talking about racism at any time with anybody. And so we do acknowledge that any step forward is progress, but making sure those step forwards are actual actions. And then discussing allies, accomplices, or co-conspirators, and figuring out which one that you can be. And then performance appraisal. So for us, we're thinking if you've gone from the recruitment process with anti-racist resources, through orientation, through the supervision, staff development, to the performance appraisal process, if you've incorporated all of this into your practices throughout the supervision cycle, your evaluations continue to do the work, or should continue to do the work that you're already doing. I'm looking at the time and it's making me nervous. So any questions, answers, I definitely want to make sure that whatever we received in the chat, or if there's anything else that we can receive, we're getting out there. At the same time, I'm going to repost the resources that we provided. This presentation was a lot of, what you can do, but we want to make sure that there's no excuse to not do it. So I am going to put the file at the bottom.
I can do it if you need me to, Maya.
Yeah. Can you?
Okay, I'll do that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just so that I can see all of y'all, and I can get access to that file. I also saw a bunch of folks asking if we could share our presentation. I'm happy to do that. So I don't know what the best way is to do that.
I can just put the link, the Google link.
Okay. Yeah, I'm wondering if it's better if we just download it, just because.
Yeah.
So let me just see if I can do that real quick.
And then I'll monitor what's happening in the chat.
Yeah, you go ahead and chat with folks.
Okay, got it.
I just want to unmute real quick and say thank you to both of you. I think it's very easy to say, I'm just not comfortable talking about this. And I just really appreciate the vulnerability you both have shared in this presentation and the knowledge and the resources. It is a lot of work and it's our job to do it. And I want to appreciate both of you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Maya.
I was going to say thank you, but I did see Deanna in the chat, and I remembered that I wanted to share what she provided in the SEAHO report that I did think was a very relevant topic to the conversation of anti-racist supervision. The article that she has is called Rise and Thrive, Women of Color Decreasing the Ambition Gap. You'll get it in your newsletter if you haven't looked already, but great work, Deanna. Work on that.
The other thing that I would just sort of chime in with is, as a white identifying person, I think it's easy to feel scared into silence around this topic, but I really encourage you to be bold, encourage you to lean into that discomfort and know that we owe it to our colleagues and our fellow human beings to do better and be better. And so it is worth sticking your neck out a little bit, if that's how it feels to you, to move us forward. So I feel vulnerable speaking in front of 130 people on this topic when I am not an expert on anti-racism, but I'm showing up every day and trying to do my best and trying to be better and owning when I make a mistake and promising not to make that mistake again. And that's really the standard I hold myself to, and what I hope you can hold yourselves to, because I think that it's realistic and, like I said, not perfection, progress.
And so we've navigated a lot that we haven't even included in this. So if at any time, I was going to go ahead and put our emails in the chat as well, if you do want to reach out, again, I know that I'm no expert. I'm only an expert in my experiences and the experiences that I try to provide to candidates and staff members. But if you want to reach out, here is my email.
I know we're at time. If y'all have other sessions, feel free to head to those other things. Thank you so much. I'm going to put my email in the chat as well.